Okay, I want to use Aristotle's delivery and style, let's put the words in the right order, and arrangement sections to kind of talk about delivery style and arrangement in a much broader umbrella. So when we get into Roman rhetoric, we're going to see, and you're going to see this in the next reading, the Rhetorica ad Herennium, which lays out the rhetorical canons, and delivery style and arrangement are a part of those. And so we're seeing the foundation of all of that here. Aristotle's not creating this for the first time. It's more that he's naming and better defining and describing the categories and how they're used, which is the focus here. But we're also going to see from this time period until literally today, there is a lot of misuse of these categories, misuse of how they work, but it depends on who you ask, right? Okay, so from a rhetorician's perspective, somebody who studies this, delivery and style are always, we're really dealing with the idea of form and content. Okay, so what is the content? What is trying to be delivered? What are the ideas? And how are the ideas structured for the particular group at the particular time in that particular context, right? That is the content. But I just said for that particular group, in that particular space, for that particular time period, which really it's so difficult, it should be difficult to divorce that from the form. Like content on its own is nothing without the form surrounding it. But I'm very biased towards rhetoric, right? So I'm seeing the interconnection and the difficulty in parsing these two things apart, but not everybody is. But we see this, like if we look at, okay, so let's parse this apart more, right? Okay, so at this time period, the other thing that we need to think about with education is rhetoric is a foundational part of the educational system. It's one of the main topics that is covered. So the way today we have English and science and math, rhetoric was its own standalone thing. And then literature of the time period had its own standalone, subject or discipline. And so it was foundational to education. And so it, wove itself into all of these other areas. And then what we're going to see, and this is where it connects to delivery style and arrangement, is the Middle Ages redefining logos completely changes who has access to rhetorical education and who doesn't. So we start to head with the Greeks into the fight. Part of the fight between Plato and the Sophists is who had access to education, because the Sophists would go out on a street corner and share, but Sophists were also for hire, and the better or more probably teaching savvy, pedagogically sound Sophists who were also able to make a name for themselves, ethos, they were for hire by exclusive families. So Sophists' approach to rhetoric was both exclusionary and accessible to people without power, which made them contentious. And so then Plato comes in wanting to make it more exclusionary, but in a school format, not within specific households. And so people would come to a school, and that's where we kind of see the school model develop. And so arrangement and style fit into each of those, because now we're still fighting over the idea, not fighting over. We're attempting to understand how we understand form and how we understand content. And by we, I mean literally human brains. How do human brains understand form and content? How do human brains understand content divorced from form and arrangement and delivery and style? And that's what all of these theorists are trying to understand. I'm not even sure that today we have an understanding, me saying it's difficult to parse them apart means that I'm not, and then I'm saying that there is no difference, that form, it's the Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. The form is just as important and just as powerful and just as persuasive as the content. But in Greek times, they're trying to separate because they're at the beginnings of trying to understand how brains work and where all these pieces fit in. Okay, so what we're seeing with Aristotle's delivery and style and then arrangement towards the end of this particular chapter is him working through those ideas. How do the brains understand, and how do we do it in a way that people can track and people can follow and audiences can follow? So again, we're not worried about audiences critiquing, we're worried about audiences understanding, having meaning, getting the content because the form is delivered and stylistically arranged in a way we're then going to see these ideas taken up over and over and over and over again. Okay, so we see them really cemented with Aristotle. Again, the sophists were talking about this. Aristotle is adding a lot more details. Plato was talking about this. Aristotle's adding more significant details. And then we start to see, and you'll see this in the next section, the Romans will really pick this up and really connect it directly to cultural literacy. Style, arrangement, and delivery, alongside the content, have a lot to do with how culture is shared and where culture is shared, specifically a very specific version of culture. Then when Rome falls apart and we see the Middle Ages, then we see style and delivery really become exclusionarily accessed by and for priests who are taught rhetoric, but they're taught to really focus more on style and delivery so that they can put the content, which is the Logos, the Word of God, the Bible, in a form, style, delivery, and arrangement that is meaningful for their audience. And they have breakdowns of who their audiences are, how audiences can be persuaded, and then specifically, because we're dealing with the church, how audiences can be converted. Because it's the church, we have some very specific goals going on there. And then coming out of the Middle Ages, when we hit the Enlightenment, this is where we got a huge then distance between logos, logic, and style and delivery. And we see logos take precedence and be taken over by science. And so then they restrict style, delivery, and arrangement as the only goal of rhetorical theory. We still see that divide today, and we still see people who have studied rhetorical education like this, like what we're doing, who are struggling to separate the form and the content in the way that I'm struggling to separate the form and the content. Both of those ideas exist simultaneously. When we call something empty rhetoric, we really aren't focused on the content. Like we're saying the content is not saying anything, and therefore the form and delivery and style, which is how then we're in empty rhetoric defines rhetoric, is form, delivery, and style, or delivery, style, arrangement, and that's it. Because there's nothing going on in the meaning. And so we've divorced, in saying empty rhetoric in the way that that's, understood as a framing, we've divorced the ability of content to carry logos, to carry logical meaning with it, because it doesn't exist in that particular saying, and we've framed that saying as empty rhetoric, right? So we still see both, and that's where this is so complicated. So that's why I wanted to make a video. I don't think I'm helping here, but hopefully a little bit. I'm trying to, none of these are short, I'm sorry. I'm trying to help so that if you read through this and you're like, this is really complicated, I can be like, yes, it is. And it still is. So on its surface, these style, delivery, arrangement, we're building categories of awareness so that we can, especially because we're dealing with oration, we can share meaning with the people that are listening to us. We will also see this from a disciplinary perspective, especially contemporary disciplines. Rhetoric as a field of study exists within both communications fields and English fields. The goals of these disciplines are vastly different. So there are colleagues that I work with across the nation that are housed in comm departments who, because we can kind of go both directions, right? But at the end of the day, it's a little more difficult for a comm person. I'm not trying to throw shade with this, but it's a little more difficult for a comm person to come over to English rhetoric, because English rhetoric always has a goal of writing. So we can have a goal of writing and broader communication, because we all, for the most part, and we'll get to this with composition, like composition is multimodal, right? Like let's take my notes as an example. I have tabs. So I have traditional text, and then I have writing on my text, and then I have tabs. Each of these means something different. This is multimodal communication. It's communicating beyond just text with a whole other host of variety of things. And then I'm turning this into an oration. So I can expand my rhetoric outside of writing, but I still see writing as very central to it. Comm sees the oration as very central, but a lot of people who haven't spent a lot of time in composition studies and writing studies don't have the language that we've developed in that field to deal with writing in the way that most compositionists deal with writing. And so that's where you see today a difference. And so we have different theorists that we look at and different fundamental goals, but you will see English people who have the comp focus go over to comm, but not necessarily vice versa. Can it happen? Yes, absolutely. But, within reason. So all of this to say, style, delivery, and arrangement. Again, Aristotle is trying to give weight to the categories to help people understand. And just note these categories get taken up and they are still debated today. But at the heart of it, what he's struggling with in this section, when he's struggling to teach his students, is that communication has a form and it has content. And where are those interlocking? Where are they separated? How, when we're putting that together, whether it's writing or it's oral or it's a video or it's random little sticky notes because I like color, where do we understand that the form communicates? And this is more a contemporary understanding. And where do we make specific choices in the form, so style, delivery, and arrangement, to help capture the content, the meaning of the content, the logos of the content, the pathos of the content, in ways that carry the message and help the audience understand it. And those aren't easy questions to answer, but that's what we're starting with, especially here with Aristotle. And then again, we're going to see it taken up a bunch. And so that's why I wanted to give you a heads up. We're going to see this taken up a bunch for the whole rest of the semester. It starts here. It is still, we still don't understand it today. We're still struggling with how all of this works. I will say when we get to the social media book, it's even more complicated, because how do you separate form from content? And then you add multiple simultaneously operating audiences in the same space, and it's so incredibly complicated that I have so many questions about the example she uses. So we're gonna see this over and over and over. So if you have questions about this section, please reach out, but really pay attention to what is going on with style, arrangement, and delivery, and how does all of it operate.